In a world seemingly spinning out of control, one might wonder, has God's wrath begun? The state of our world today leaves many of us asking this very question. Let's take a moment to observe the world around us. We see wars tearing nations apart, people displaced, homes reduced to rubble. The echo of the battle cries rings in our ears, the pain of loss imprinted on the faces of survivors. World leaders speak of peace, yet their actions often tell a different story. As the famous quote from Albert Einstein goes, "Peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding." Next, let's consider the plight of the poor. The wealth gap continues to widen, with the rich growing richer while the poor struggle to survive. The world watches in silence as millions suffer from hunger, malnutrition, and inadequate health care. To quote Mahatma Gandhi, "Poverty is the worst form of violence." Lastly, let's not forget the environmental disasters that have become all too common. Forests burn, the air we breathe becomes more polluted, and the ice at our poles melts at an alarming rate. As former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said, "We are the first generation to be able to end poverty, and the last generation that can take steps to avoid the worst impacts of climate change." Indeed, these are troubled times. The world is in chaos, and it seems like humanity is on a downward spiral. But here's the question we should be asking ourselves. Is this really the wrath of God? To understand if we are experiencing God's wrath, we must first understand what it is. God's wrath, in its simplest terms, is his divine response to sin and disobedience. It's a concept deeply rooted in various religious beliefs, shaping our understanding of divine justice and morality. In Christianity, for instance, God's wrath is often associated with the concept of sin. The Bible, in Romans chapter 1, verses 18 to 32, speaks of God's wrath being revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. It's not about a vengeful deity, but rather a righteous God who can't tolerate sin. In Islam, God's wrath is similarly tied to disobedience. The Quran frequently mentions God's wrath, often in the context of the consequences faced by those who reject his guidance. Yet it's also coupled with his mercy, reinforcing the idea that God's wrath is not arbitrary, but a matter of divine justice. The Bhagavad Gita, a sacred text in Hinduism, also explores divine wrath, albeit in a different light. Here, God's wrath is less about punishment and more about maintaining cosmic order, dharma. The wrath of God is a corrective, a way to restore balance when it's disrupted by evil. These interpretations highlight a common thread. God's wrath is not about divine anger or spite. It's a holistic, just response to moral transgressions, disobedience, and the disruption of divine order. Why might God show wrath? Simply put, it's a consequence of our actions. When we stray from the path of righteousness, when we disrupt the harmony of the universe with our misdeeds, we invite divine wrath. But remember, it's not about punishment for punishment's sake. It's about balance, justice, and ultimately, love. God's wrath is a call back to the path of righteousness, a call to repentance, and a reminder of the divine love that awaits us when we return. Now that we understand God's wrath, we can ask the question, are we living in its midst? Many spiritual seekers look for signs, but what signs might indicate the beginning of God's wrath? Throughout history, there have been numerous occurrences that various cultures and religions have interpreted as signs of God's wrath. These signs often appear in the form of natural disasters, societal decay, and moral degradation, manifesting as disruptions that shake the very fabric of our existence. Take a moment to ponder over the ancient city of Pompeii, buried under a thick layer of volcanic ash in 79 AD. It was believed by some at the time that the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, which destroyed the city, was a sign of God's wrath against the immoral practices of Pompeii's inhabitants. Similarly, consider the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah. These two cities, according to the book of Genesis, were destroyed by God due to their rampant wickedness and disregard for moral law. The story serves as a stark reminder of the potential consequences of societal decay and moral degradation. Natural disasters, too, have often been interpreted as signs of divine discontent. Earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, and plagues have all been seen as manifestations of God's wrath, responses to human transgressions. For example, the Great Lisbon earthquake of 1755, which resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of people, was interpreted by many at the time as a sign of divine retribution. But it's not just physical calamities that may serve as signs. A society in turmoil marked by widespread corruption, injustice and inequality can also be seen as an indication of divine wrath. The moral fabric of a society is just as important, if not more so, than its physical well-being. While these signs may seem ominous, it's crucial to remember that they are not definitive proof of God's wrath, but rather interpretations of events shaped by cultural and religious understandings. They serve as reminders, urging us to reflect on our actions and strive for a more just, compassionate world. With these signs in mind, let's examine our world today. Does our world reflect the signs of God's wrath? This question has been echoing for centuries, even millennia, and today we attempt to grapple with it yet again. Let's take a moment to consider the state of our world. We've seen a surge in natural disasters, social unrest, and global pandemics. Some believe these events are the manifestation of God's wrath, a divine consequence of our collective actions. To them, the world is a mirror reflecting the severity of our transgressions. But let's delve deeper. We can't ignore the fact that many of these events have scientific explanations. Climate change, for instance, is largely responsible for the increase in extreme weather events. It's a byproduct of our dependence on fossil fuels, not necessarily a divine punishment. Similarly, social unrest often stems from systemic injustices that have plagued societies for generations. And pandemics, well, they've been part of our world's history since time immemorial, long before our modern sins could have prompted them. But what do the experts say? Scholars, theologians and philosophers have dedicated lifetimes to understanding the divine. Many argue that God's wrath isn't so much about punishment, but more about correction. It's a call to humanity to change course, to choose love and compassion over hate and indifference. And yet others contest this view, asserting that God's wrath doesn't play out in real-world events. Instead, they propose it's a spiritual concept, a metaphor for the inner turmoil that ensues when we stray from the path of righteousness. So does our world reflect the signs of God's wrath? The answer isn't black and white. It's a complex tapestry of perspectives and interpretations, woven together by our collective quest for understanding. The evidence might seem compelling, but there's another perspective to consider. In the midst of fear and uncertainty, there's a message of hope. In every corner of the world, individuals are rising, making conscious decisions to effect positive changes. There's the story of a woman in a small village who, despite the odds, has managed to establish a school for children who would have otherwise been denied an education. Across the ocean, a man has dedicated his life to planting thousands of trees, transforming a barren wasteland into a lush green forest. These stories and countless others are testament to the fact that God's wrath, as we perceive it, is not a punishment, but rather a call to action. A call for us, humanity, to wake up, to better ourselves and to heal our world. In the words of the Dalai Lama, the planet does not need more successful people. The planet desperately needs more peacemakers, healers, restorers, storytellers, and lovers of all kinds. This is the true essence of our existence, the underlying message in every spiritual teaching, and the core of every inspirational figure's discourse. Consider the words of Mahatma Gandhi, who once said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." What if God's wrath is but a mirror, reflecting back at us the need for change? What if it's a catalyst, urging us to be better, to do better, not out of fear, but out of love for ourselves, for each other, and for the world we call home? Here's a thought from Martin Luther King Jr. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Perhaps the signs we perceive as God's wrath are not meant to incite fear, but to inspire love, to ignite that light within us, and to motivate positive change. So rather than fear God's wrath, let us see it as a call to love, to change, and to hope. Let us rise to the occasion. Let us be the peacemakers, the healers, the restorers, the storytellers, and the lovers that our world so desperately needs. For in doing so, we not only alleviate the signs of God's wrath, but we also create a world that truly reflects the best of us.